Welcome to the L&D Go Beyond podcast. This is the show that brings you real, actionable workplace learning insights from some of the brightest minds in the L&D space. This season, we're diving into the realm of learning impact. Join experts as they share their knowledge and experiences, helping us push the boundaries of what's possible when it comes to delivering impactful learning. Get ready to go beyond. Enjoy the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of the L&D Go Beyond podcast. Here we gather insights from experts to help L&D teams truly go beyond. Our focus in this season, as you know, has been on learning and training impact. Today, our guest on the show is Anish Lalchandani. Hi, Anish. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Amit. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Anish, allow me to introduce you to our audience. Anish Lalchandani is the global head of talent management AP Moller-Maersk. He's also the author of the book, The Skills Advantage, a human-centered, sustainable, and scalable approach to reskilling. Having held leadership roles in leading firms like AP Moller-Maersk, General Electric, Standard Chartered Bank, and other organizations, he has developed extensive expertise in talent, OD, leadership, and HR strategy. In addition to being a chartered fellow of the CIPD, he is also a certified professional coach and mentor to startup founders. He has been listed as one of the top influencers in HR and the flow of work by several publications, including the Economic Times and the HR. Anish, welcome again. I'm so happy to have you join us today.
I'm looking forward to this conversation, Amit. Means there's so much to talk about on this topic, and I really look forward to this conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Anish, why don't we learn a little bit about your journey? Where have you been and what excites you today?
Oh wow! It's if I reflect on my career journey, it's taken me to a number of places, a number of roles, and number of areas. So I actually started my career in the business, doing a number of things around process optimization, looking at customers, and number of those things. And that world fascinated me. I mean, you talk about Six Sigma, you talk about lean, you talk about, how do you really understand the voice of customer? And that made me even more curious to kind of, look at this further and deeper, like what really makes and breaks a process. And it was a moment for me to realize it's not the process we design, which possibly after the design, no one actually even looks at it. It's actually the people. Yeah, and from there, I kind of did my master's in HR, and then pivoted slowly into actually doing a number of transformation programs and projects across HR, and that was the breadth of experience I got from M&A to culture and OD projects, to system projects, to capability building projects, and all the gamut, if you ask me. So my first phase of my career after my business stint was quite a lot in transformation programs and projects. And from there, I moved into generalist kind of roles within HR, looking at operations, delivery, et cetera, et cetera. And in the last, I think, possibly 10 years or so, I've focused quite a lot in the space of talent, leadership, culture, and OD. And I've been fortunate enough to work with a number of brands, as you kind of mentioned, a number of very interesting leaders, I would say as well, who have shaped my career and have mentored me, and I'm really blessed for that. And I've also been kind of fortunate to work on a number of interesting projects and programs. Like I did a work on people leadership effectiveness, did some work on CEO succession, did some work on onboarding. Of course, talent, succession management, et cetera, has been always there. But there's been some very interesting projects and programs I have been involved in. And now at AB Moller-Maersk, essentially I focus on talent management and how do we define the strategy around it and how do we really build solutions which we can scale across the organization. So yeah, it's been a very interesting journey, lots of learnings, lots of ups and downs also, I would say. But where I am, I'm really happy in that stage of the career.
Excellent. That's wonderful. When you move from business side into HR side, you bring that perspective that sometimes may be lacking, and it gives you good understanding of how the business works, and hence creating processes, systems, policies from the HR side for that just works better. So I'm sure that's benefited you as well as you transition into HR.
Yeah, I think you're right, Amit. It means the focus of the business is around clients and customers. Yeah, they really try to kind of look at that lens. And when if we, from an HR point of view, start to really understand how that works for them, what are the real business problems they are trying to tackle, the way we would think of solutions, we will design them would also be very different. Yeah, and I think it will not be for the sake of a HR solution, but it will be for the sake of a business problem what we're trying to solve. And with that, the different kind of questions which will come to your mind in terms of even at your diagnostic stage of what do you ask, and how can we really then support the business in terms of what they really want to do.
Mm. And the language you use, your language might be very business-like rather than, very HR-like, and it makes it easier to really uh, behave like a consultant to them because you have been in their shoes and you probably understand their challenges a little more.
And I think language is also important, as you rightly say, because if you go and say we want to implement leadership capabilities or leadership development program, that's great. But for what? What is what is it going to solve for? How is it going to support the business strategy and the KPIs? And if you're able to connect those dots together, and there are correlations, I'm not saying they're not, but if you're able to connect those dots together and really solve some of those business challenges and show the business leaders, okay, this is the medium term, short term, and long term kind of goal. And in some of those, it will only be long term. But can we start now? And using that language of, okay, this is how we definitely talk about, cost saves, etc. But instead of that, can we actually talk about value creation? Yeah, and that can kind of change the conversation entirely, and also kind of helps you to get a lot of sponsorship and buy-in upfront because the leaders see, okay, this is not a HR solution, this is actually a business solution, and people function or HR teams are supporting us in that journey.
Excellent. Uh, let's dive straight into your book. I know it's a big milestone in your career, and we know the topic. We know a little bit that you have already published, but talk to us about how did it happen? What are you trying to share with the world with this book?
Sure, and I think as you rightly said, Amit, it's the focus is on how do we build a skills advantage for an organization, and I kind of speak to around things like how do we make it human centered, how do we make it sustainable, and how do we make it scalable. Means the origin story is possibly roughly around 3 years ago. If you ask me, we were still in COVID. There were lots of things moving and changing. Hybrid work. We were seeing some businesses kind of closing down. We were seeing number of layoffs and redundancies happening, etc., etc. And at the same time, people are also trying to grapple with how do we really work in these new ways of working? What would that mean for us, etc., and etc. And in that context, I also saw, many organizations continue to spend, I would think, billions into people development, upskilling, and reskilling. And I was also getting frustrated to see is what's really not working. Yeah, so when I connect the dots of what a business needs, what the macroeconomic environment is, and then actually see the investments which are being made, they're not really helping us to get that right impact. And I was quite getting frustrated. I was trying to kind of learn in terms of what's going on. So I started my journey with reading, researching, speaking to a number of people. And that's how I think the premise of the book came along. The book essentially focuses on a number of three things, which I said. How do we make it human centered? So it's not people development for the sake of it. It's not about let's put five more training programs or give a digital library to the users so that they can use it. But how can we make it human centered? And if I double click on it, I think it's about what is the individual's learning needs, personal career ambitions, and how do we marry that with what's possible and what the organization has to offer. So if we start to kind of make sure that's working well, we possibly get far more engaged learners. We possibly get less no-shows. We possibly get less people to chase, to complete their kind of, post-course work, for example. So that was something I kind of focused on, and I researched with a number of firms which are doing pretty good in this space, like Unilever and a few other firms. So that is the one part. The second part was all about making it sustainable. So reskilling, upskilling in the context again from an AI point of view and automation point of view, it's not going to stop. We'll continue to see how AI would essentially augment the capabilities, I would say. So what would that mean for individuals? It's less about only individuals again. It then boils down to the entire workforce. So we need to have a solution which is sustainable. It's means I'd say reskilling actually is a long-term game. It's not a short-term process. You can't put a band-aid approach to it and move on. And you need to sustain it, one from a workforce point of view, but second also from a point of view that how would you really constantly look at upskilling and reskilling the workforce. And the last one is quite obvious. If you ask me, when you talk about workforce, you have to make a scalable solution using technology, using data, using different ways so that you are able to bring that to different people across the organization. So that's the origin story, and that's what broadly the premise of the book is.
So how does that align? Is it that the training programs typically are more short-term focused and reskilling as uh, an agenda that the organization should have a longer term time frame in mind? Is there a mapping of the two that you have in mind that you can share?
Sure, and I think it's a great question, because how do you bring that synergies of the human center, which is the individual needs, and the organizational needs, if I call it a programmatic approach to reskilling, these two together. So they both needs to coexist. Means you can't just only cater to what individual wants, and then organization will possibly say, okay, so that's great. We train everyone, or we give them say budgets or opportunities to learn, but how will that benefit the organization? Yeah, so it has to be a win-win in that instance. So that's the way I look at this, is the integrated skills development approach. Yeah. One way you look at it, how do you help the individuals to understand their purpose, bring alignment with their values, then translate that into the skills and the careers they want to pursue, and then support them in terms of how they can actually build those skills. It could be adjacent skills, it could be different job profiles, it could be within the same area, depends. So how do you kind of help focus on the individual and engage them in that manner would be very helpful. But when we look at it from an organizational strategy point of view, we also need to start looking at what are the trends in terms of what are the job families where we see there's a decline. For example, there are some number of jobs which may not even be there in the future, or drastically change in terms of the nature of the work which is required in those jobs. And if we start to kind of look at the emerging and the declining skills, map it to the emerging and declining job families, you possibly get something which is organizational level you need to prioritize based on your business context, where you decide, okay, these are a couple of job families, these are going to grow for us. How do we build that pipeline today? And you can actually put a very programmatic focused work around reskilling for those job families. Now, number of people who are not doing those jobs today may also be interested, and that aligns to their personal career paths potentially. Yeah. Or there will be also other job families where you start to kind of look at, okay, so there can be a number of other roles who can also do these jobs, and potentially expose these programs to them. So yes, I think you start to focus from a business strategy, longer term view of what's required, what's coming. But the reason I say it's a long term game is you cannot do that for a role which is coming tomorrow or even next year. It takes a number of months and years to build that pipeline. First, to analyze all of this, and then to actually have a structured program besides the more flexible kind of options which the individuals have. So if you try to marry these together, then you start to get some advantages which the individual feels, okay, this is aligned to my kind of values and careers, and I would love to do this, and the organization supports it. And at the same time, then you also start to kind of build a pipeline for some of those pivotal roles or job families. And you can start to think of redeploying people on a proactive manner. So if a data, say, if a data operations job is going to disappear in a couple of months or years, can they become data analyst? And there are a number of adjacent skills which could be used further. But it wouldn't be that we can just put them in that job tomorrow. So that's in a way looking at how you can look at both these aspects, and of course have that flexibility as well as a programmatic approach to it. The urgency for some of these things to be done has increased. Yeah. And I think the other part we also need to realize is why people have not used these in the past. Because in the past, the way possibly it was done is, okay, let bring in a subject matter expertise, put them into a room, and we come up with those competencies. I think that was great. It worked pretty well. But what happens is it takes you, and I have done this exercise a couple, 5, 6 years ago, and it took us like more than a year to do number of job families. And by the time possibly you complete that, bring it to a kind of a framework solution, oh, we have a change. Now, we need to think of cyber, we need to think of number of new things which come up, which is true. Yeah. So on the other side, what's happening, and I think there are a number of things which are promising in this, but I'm also cautious that it's not the rosy story which people think, which is where is there are a number of organizations which are coming up with solutions which are very simply, if you ask me, on a concept of big data. When they look at all the jobs which are actually being advertised outside, all the research which is there in terms of kind of declining and emerging skills, and then they bring all of that into a meaningful kind of a format which organizations can use. And I'm simplifying it to the great extent, for our listeners. At the same time, then you also start to kind of ask your kind of employees, what are the skills you think you bring in? Besides the job, which you can easily translate into skills, what are the skills you bring in? And they potentially have more. That's the another fundamental interesting aspect to double click on is the whole person concept. So they will have other skills which we have not tapped. So there's a hidden talent or skills pool which is also available. So when you start to marry the version of what employees, the skills they have, what the job requires, and what's externally available, you start to get a very interesting picture. Again, I've oversimplified it. There are good solutions available to do this, but it really needs focused effort and investment. And it also needs a huge cultural shift in terms of employees being open to talk about this. Employees kind of coming in and say, okay, this is going to benefit me, and this is how I'll update systems, etc. Because self-service can work in many instances, but it also doesn't work in many others. I think it's a different way of looking at it, using more data and technology. And that's what I think, in my book, I call it, can L&D people become the futurist? Yeah, which is where they're trying to actually map futures in different ways, but taking a skills lens. And then what do you do with it is the next step to it.
So if you can list out, if somebody wants to go on this journey of reskilling, planning the whole thing, the analysis and the implementation, what has been typical challenges that they have faced? One you just talked about, which you were involved in. By the time they finish the analysis, things change, right? Participation, culture. But if you can just tell us a little more about what typically are the bigger challenges that companies will face.
Sure. So I think there are a number of challenges across this approach as well. Yeah, and people are kind of iterating and kind of learning from this. I don't think there's any or one organization who has solved all of this. So I've spoken to possibly 10 such organizations and leaders who have done this, and they've done different parts to it. So the first thing, I think the challenge or the problem people kind of try to tackle is, let's tackle this for the entire organization. And that's a very big problem to start with, and really then people get stuck with it. So I think the learning there is focus on areas which actually are going to be, from business point of view, is going to be relevant for you to zoom in. Where you see really a lot of these changes happening. So be selective as you start. I'm not saying don't scale it, but don't even ever attempt to go full on. So that's one. You have to be very clear about the business needs, the business scope, and then kind of go after it. Yeah, that's the scope piece. The second piece also, and I think this is another fundamental shift which I'm trying to put into it's in my book, where I talk about it's not only one team which is going to be able to solve it. So is it L&D? Is it HR business partners? Is it talent acquisition, etc.? And the challenge I've seen is actually it either originates in talent teams or L&D teams, and depending on how they are structured, if they do this together. But this really requires a one HR kind of approach. Because think of it, means you're talking about touching employees, you're talking about their careers, you're talking about how would we move them to different jobs, and you're also talking about a very big strategic piece on the entire skills framework, etc. So you need to bring all these teams together to do this. So it can originate in one team, but then you actually need all of teams to come together on this journey. And that's where I've also seen is there are a couple of teams who do it, but then we realize, okay, we have put in a solution, we have some insights, then what do we do next with it? And it will happen in the next phase, or how do we do it? People get stuck with it. So that's another kind of learning, if you ask me, which I have seen definitely. Means culture is a big one. Yeah. So if you're not able to kind of call out that we are investing in our people, this is how we build careers in our organization. This is where we see your journeys, and these are some of the ways you can benefit. You would not see employees putting in any data in the system. Yeah. So I think that's a big piece for us to solve, and they also need to have a trust and start to sense that this is where we can actually benefit from it, which is again the human-centered aspect. So it means these are some of the learnings, if you ask me. But of course, as I said, we need to take baby steps in some of this. We need to start small, but then we kind of learn and iterate, and then possibly take it to the next level.
Makes sense. Absolutely. Uh, Anish, since these are long-term projects, how do the teams that are involved as one HR, how do they show impact in this case? How does it really show up in any metrics? Are there ways that people will be measuring it? Uh, Essentially, how do you link these initiatives with what kind of outcomes it has had?
Sure, and I think means there are two possibly paths to this question. I think one is I can give you some specifics around the work on skills, but also like conceptually, how do we start to look at outcomes, and for a number of other projects and programs we have looked at. So part one of this is when we start to look at, okay, what is the problem we are trying to solve. Yeah, and there'll be a number of those which would kind of come to light. One of the things I mean, there are a number of things I can call out which I've seen in this space, where people say, okay, we have saved X number of hours in terms of productivity. Yeah, how do we do that? We essentially say there are projects, people come, contribute into it, they learn in the process, and we also kind of get benefits out of that. So for me, that's great. So what?
Hmm.
Yeah, was that even a business problem, or we actually said, yeah, this is how the way we solve it? Yeah. So then second question would be, are we really meaningfully bringing those teams through data analytics and number of other ways, where we had no clue of how to solve a problem, but because we got visibility of skills, we solved the problem, and this is how the customer got impacted. Yeah. In some cases, it can be very short term because it can be very tactical, but in some cases, it actually can be longer term. So you can start to see the value of bringing in different diverse skills into that mix, which supports a customer or a problem which we're trying to solve or design something.
Hmm.
So there can be number of ways you can kind of start to measure it, but you can also then start to also measure number of ways you actually improving on the emerging skills. So if you realize, okay, we have X skill, which is emerging skill, and we're building that capability within the organization with all the work we've done, is that skills canvas, if I call it, is that changing? So that gives you a strategic kind of overview of where we are going. But then you'll have to always iterate that. Yeah, means a number of other things which I call out in the book also are around: are we? What is the percentage of redeployment of our staff? So instead of laying off, can we redeploy our people? I mean, that could be a very strong measure from a people point of view. Of course, it has cost a number of other things. I will not even go there. You definitely save a lot of that, but can we even redeploy our people? And then, if you are really doing that, then you can possibly start to see a number of interesting things which come up in engagement, in the stickiness in the organization, and people actually valuing the way the organization is supporting them in their careers. So there's a business angle to it, and there's also a employee or a colleague angle to it, which you can start to kind of measure. So that's, I think, specifically around skills. But if I pivot and talk about number of other areas where we kind of really look at impact, yes, I think I would say there are a number of areas, in my experience, we've done, okay, fine, we have achieved the impact, but how do we define that? I think comes up. So one of the things we even use at Maersk is something called as, we actually write a press release in our design stage, okay, of any solution. And what that, and this is like a concept of working backwards, which Amazon has used. So our concept is, if after a year, if I need to release this solution, what would be I communicating to my customers or clients? So that's one. So you actually really say, this is what's going to change, this is how it is, these are number of benefits, this is how you use it. And on the back of that, we have something called as a PR FAQ, which actually has some very simple but very strong questions for us to start thinking. What's the problem? What's the solution? Who's the customer? How will we benefit? How would we measure it? How will it impact other processes? What's going to happen with if we do it this way? What will be the approach, cost, number of the planning things? Now, the beauty is this document is a live document. You start with this and you continue till you actually do that press release, and of course beyond it. So you keep iterating. That's one. When it comes to impact, yeah, there are two broad ways we look at measuring any solution, if you ask me. One would be your adoption measures, which is very standard from a learning point of view. It's number of people attending the course, etc., etc. Great. I know they're not really impact measures, but they actually tell you the engagement with the solution in a manner. Yeah. The second would be the outcome measures. And what that would be is, okay, so how are we going to achieve with doing all of this? Will we be able to achieve a healthy internal, say, hiring ratio of 70%? If it was 30%, and if we do that, then what would be the business impact because of that in terms of retention of skills, shorter time to deploying people, number of things which we can kind of relate to customer. Of course, there can be other cost things to it as well, but that's how we start to kind of look at adoption and outcomes broadly. And means if I maybe take an example and kind of share with you how would we really do this, or what are the ways for us to look at it. And what comes to my mind is, it's a couple of years ago, I was asked, from one of my leaders to say is, okay, we have a problem. I said, so what is the problem? We need to redesign our leadership program. So I said, that's great. Means that's a pretty standard thing. Yeah, means we can do that a couple of times in 4 or 5 years. You realize something has changed, etc. So I said, yeah, means I think I'm happy to look at it. But why are we doing this? So I was just curious, as usual. And I think the brief I was given is, yes, what we're hearing is we need to redesign the leadership program. But what I want you to go and find out is what is the real problem. So yes, there was noise, there's all going on, but that's what she asked me, my boss, to say is, but you need to properly frame the problem and actually tell me what the problem is. Yeah, and she knew herself that it's beyond only a redesign of a program. Uh, and I think that is how I would see any professional approaching this, to say is, even if there's a problem, why there's a problem, what are we trying to do? And and I think, as I told you, I have an unconventional kind of career path. So I've done business transformation, L&D, talent, other stuff. So I bring all these things together, and I said, okay, fine. So let's speak to a number of people. Let's understand what's going on, how we approach this. Spoke to a number of HR stakeholders and business stakeholders. Yeah. So I heard, yes, we do need to redesign our program. A number of other things. The business side, yes, this is how it's helpful, but this is not how it's helpful. We should totally change it, or we should keep it. You get all very interesting and diverse views. So I said, who's the customer in this? Yeah. The leaders, if you are designing it for, actually we used to call them managers. So I'll come to why did we reframe them to leaders in that process. So I took a pretty OD approach, a very systems thinking approach, to say, is fine, we have 2 years of engagement data. We can dig into it and understand thematically what it is telling us in this context. We spoke to a number of leaders, who are in the organization, and asked them what are they facing, how can we help. Number of those interviews we did. We do a number of focus groups with employees, because if a leader is a good leader, a great leader, a bad leader, you possibly will also hear it from the employees. Yeah. So we actually did work with them also. What came out with all of this analysis, and we did an external study of what other organizations are doing in this space. What we realized, the problem was not that the leadership program was not working. What we realized, there were a number of different phases to this. And that's the reason I call it people leader effectiveness work. It's not people leader development work. So we framed it to how do we make actually our leaders effective. So then we literally started to look at, how do we hire and onboard leaders? How do we develop them, which is one part of the entire solution? How do we continuously engage them? And how do we also measure their effectiveness? Yeah, so you start to kind of look at different paths, and that's where, like in this example, it was not one team; a number of teams within HR also got involved at the end. So it was these different ways, different layers, and I know at times it can be difficult to get data, and it can be also difficult to run this. And the reason I think I didn't tell you earlier was the backdrop of this was we had very clearly articulated that we are refreshing our organizational values, and that would mean people manager are our culture carriers. So it is not about can they manage teams, but can they be the culture ambassadors? And that was a different narrative. And that's the reason we took a very different approach. And we did a lot of interesting analysis to look at spans and layers. If there are bigger spans, is the engagement higher, lower? To looking at female and male leaders, to looking at job level, to looking at different countries, and we found some very, very interesting examples. Yeah. So, long story short, we arrived at something which we very simply said is this is what each leader should be doing. We created a very simple toolkit which they can run on their own. But with that narrative and all that analysis, the way we were thinking of designing our program or the refresh changed drastically. Yeah. And I think what we also started to kind of do is then start to measure the effectiveness of our leaders and number of ways, but one of them was manager NPS. So would you recommend your manager to someone else or not? Literally, yeah. And this is part of the engagement survey. But then also what has happened is we realized, yes, we refreshed our programs, but then we need to, it's a community. Leadership in a way is that is a community. And even till date, there are senior leaders who actually engage this community globally couple of times in a year, listen to them, share ideas, and help them to be the cultural ambassadors. So it means if you look at it, all of these, the impact, if you wouldn't have asked those questions, I wouldn't have had that mandate, if you ask me as well, to go beyond, yeah, wouldn't have been the same result. But that also required number of people to kind of, think differently. And there were a number of other solutions, etc., which we also looked at it in terms of how do we set objectives and a number of the areas which like, okay, if we're able to do some of this, then actually it helps us to build that foundation of many other things to go. Yeah, so it means it's an example where at least I was quite happy and it ran for a couple of years. It's still work in progress, if you ask me, in many ways.
Yeah, quite a few interesting things there. Thank you for sharing that. Excellent. I wanted to, further dive deep into something you mentioned a little while back around emerging skills. How is the emerging skills thing working for most organizations?
So I think it's a great question, and I think it goes back to the business context. I think it's a combination of those two things. One is you internally have a view, which is I would think are the broad capabilities. You want to kind of focus on. Yes, but if number of people have done really good workforce planning, number of other things, they would have that in a thematic way. If you ask me, at least that available to them. Yeah, so that's one. The second bit is then you can actually look at all this market intelligence which is outside, which either means you can even buy today all these skill libraries, yeah, for a number of things. So you can go out and even look at what's available, and there are people who are like compiling it based on research, based on jobs being advertised, based on the forecast and number of other areas. But I would definitely say, see what really is going to work for you. Apply your judgment from that business lens, even if you have that available to you, and then you'll have to prioritize. Yeah. So I think it is a combination of both. But today, I think in the market there is quite a lot of platforms or data providers or technologies which are kind of providing you that. And then like even if you look at like World Economic Forum, for example, I usually read their 200 odd pages reports, so there are a number of interesting trends you see there as well. But that's what I always suggest to people. You see the trends, but there's also a lot of noise in that. And you need to filter that noise. This is your lens of what's required in your organization, what will work, where you have to focus on. So yes, it can be a combination of both. And it can also be like, you start to kind of, look at different kind of industries and how they're evolving. And the challenge quite a lot where it comes is, I would think are the functional areas. So, so if you are not a technology organization, but you have a technology department, and it will be a small department or a big department, depending on the size, you wouldn't have that quite a lot internal available. So you possibly would be thinking, okay, maybe shall I see what Microsoft or Google or someone else is doing, for example, or how it's evolving there. Yeah, so you can definitely look at that. But again, what works in Microsoft may not work in your organization. Yeah, so I think those are the things where actually the prioritization comes in, where actually also the way of where you're gonna be looking at the trends in terms of your strategy and say, okay, are we gonna expand in these markets? Are we gonna expand this product? We will have possibly three different products, but we'll have similar skills required. So shall we do that? So there are a number of these business imperatives, I call it, which will also guide you in that to say is where should we look at? Because there's quite a lot out there. But then how do you zoom in and also focus on the critical ones?
Yeah, and it can get a bit confusing, even intimidating for some that, oh, there are so many emerging skills. In fact, I just wanted to quickly get your thought on uh, how do you see the term future skills? Is this the same as emerging skills? Uh, how does the world interpret the two of those?
Means they're similar, if you ask me. Yeah. So some people say, yeah, these are the future skills. but I think then we keep revising those future skills also. Yeah, which is fair because I think things change, if you ask me. So World Economic Forum also has, these are the top 10 skills. I think in the last few years, it has broadly remained the same because those are not the technical skills, if you ask me, they're kind of focusing on. But then, as I said, you have the future skills, you can also think of this as a future skills are your entire pie.
Hmm.
Yeah. But within that, your context, you actually try to draw your slice, which is the emerging skills. Yeah, I mean, it can overlap, but then you also need to possibly think, will you do all of that? Maybe not.
Hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Let me try and link it back to the L&D world specifically. So in the quest of these bigger programs on reskilling, uh, are you looking at training any differently? Is it just being more people centric, design better, etc.? But is there anything else that you are seeing that needs to be done on the L&D side to achieve these?
Yeah. So I think is something which I kind of call is the other four cornerstones of reskilling.
Hmm?
Yeah. And you can do it agnostically, and you can, I think the best part of the thing, if we even try to pick up a few ideas, we don't need to solve entirely for all the things. Yeah. And in the four kind of, cornerstones, I talk about awareness. Okay. And we'll double click on that. I talk about application. Then I talk about agility. And then I talk about alliances.
Okay.
Okay, all four of them are very interestingly related to L&D. Yeah. The first one, I think we talked about human centered. Yeah. So I think I've possibly explained quite a lot on that. But the bit around awareness is very interesting. It boils down to engagement of the learner.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And if you are possibly focusing or looking at it differently and not looking at it purely from a training point of view or L&D point of view, then you actually start to focus on the individual. You start to focus on the talent. And you start to kind of, tap the pool of talent and skills which are possibly not even known. Yeah. So quite a lot around how do we look into that? What can we learn from that? And how can we connect? And these are interesting things. How can we connect purpose, well-being, and skills?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. So if you're not well, you have no energy to do anything. So well-being is important. If you are not clear about the purpose or why is it helping you, you're not going to spend time on skilling.
Motivation.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting aspect. These are pre, if you ask me, a lot of skill building stuff in a way, but can also be connected. It can also be brought into very simple ways within any program. So it doesn't need to be like a program on its own, if you ask me, but can we connect some of these components into the mix?
Hmm.
Is the first one to look at. Its application is, you possibly know more than me in this space, but this was my frustration to look at the number of things we put out there. Like we say, oh, the content is available. These are digital libraries of 2,000 or 200,000 courses available to you. So what?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how can we build that deliberate practice into skill building? Because means the example I kind of take is in the book is I came to Singapore 17 years ago or so. I was enrolled in a Mandarin class because you kind of had the option to learn. So I said, fine, let me give it a try. 6 months. Today I only know one line of Mandarin. The reason is I didn't have time to practice because English is the commonly spoken language in Singapore. Yeah. So I had no opportunity besides that class to practice it. And means 6 months again is short, but you can do more if you are building that way of how can we apply the skills, and then creating that platform in terms of either it could be projects, it could be the standard. If you ask me 70-20-10, I means people like keep questioning around the number, but I still love it because we always talk about 10. Yeah, but why not about 70 and 20? So bringing, I think, that entirety into it. The other thing which is maybe a bit controversial, but if you think of reskilling, and we talk quite a lot in many other instances of learning in the flow of work, and somewhere I think there's overlap, but it's not entirely the same in my view.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because if you have to reskill from A to B, you'll not even have the work to actually experiment and learn stuff. So yes, there's a piece which has to be in a way you have to really reskill people, not only upskill, which is a different thing, and then kind of take it to the next level. Yeah, so I kind of talk a bit about that in the application piece. Agility is another interesting thing, means like from a L&D point of view, and this is where I said, yeah, we can take 5 months to a year at times to design programs, and the business context changes. And it has happened to me a couple of times. It was even an e-learning where we said, okay, it's all signed up, and we're like 1 week before the going live, oh no, but we're changing the policy. And the way we had done the e-learning, there was no way we could have changed it in a week's time. But then how can you bring that agility in terms of the design? How can you bring that agility in terms of the choices people have also? Yeah, so that's a piece on agility, and how do we use technology, of course, because you have to scale, and data, and continuous loop of feedback in terms of taking to the next level. The last one is a very simple one. Who's responsible for reskilling? Who's responsible for people development? Yeah, I mean, this is a very simple and complex kind of area, but that's what I think the fourth one, which is alliances. I talk to that in the book as well. So yes, there's definitely the individual and the agency to learn. Yeah, so they are in the driving seat, but who's helping them to be the navigator? Who's helping them to really build those roads, which is an ecosystem, which can be government organizations. For example, in Singapore, like we have Skills Future, which is a focus on skilling. It can be educational institutes, etc. It can be industry bodies. And in some parts of the world, like Singapore, Canada, France, and a few others, it is coming up slowly. It's not only the corporate responsible for this. It's not only the individual, because then it's not going to get solved. So it's a matter of how do we all come together to build this, because when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to unemployment benefit, etc., then government starts to kind of panic to say, how do we manage this? So why don't we proactively do that? And of course, work with, have that government and private partnership as well. So those are the four kind of cornerstones of reskilling, and actually that they are all packed with number of things, a number of ideas and case studies. How some organizations are doing. I talk about an organization called as Next Jump. In that they are the DDO. They are deliberately development organization. It was just they had this, I think, I don't know, ranking or something from Harvard or something, and they have a very interesting way of looking at people and people development. One of the policies is they will never fire anyone for performance reasons. So they have created an entire approach on, they call it design gym, they call it different ways of feedback, different ways of helping people to support through that change, but continue to be focused on people development. And it's a very successful organization as well. Yeah, so some interesting examples and case studies. But yeah, means these are some of the ideas which I'm trying to put out there so that we can all learn in the process. And of course, if there are better ideas, happy to also listen to them and also see how we can incorporate.
So fantastic, Anish. I think great insights into what you've already written, and hopefully we'll get to see that soon. Thank you for sharing all of this information today. It was a very insightful conversation. From my perspective, I learned a lot. So thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. I think it's always good to interact with you, and also to share with other people. And I think it's just the beginning of the journey, and hopefully I think people get some good takeaways from this podcast.
Thank you.